In the 1600s, a man built the most powerful telescope ever, and on January 7th, 1610, he used it to look further than any human being in history. But when he did, he saw something strange. Jupiter wasn't alone. There were 3 small stars. Over the next few days, they moved, and then there were 4. But that wasn't possible. Stars didn't move like that. For centuries, humanity believed the sky rotated us. The sun and planets orbited Earth. The stars were fixed on a shell. Medieval scholars thought they were embedded in a crystalline sphere that rotated every 24 hours around a stationary Earth. But the man saw stars that were moving. He thought he must have miscalculated, but his observations were consistent. The 4 stars were being dragged by the big planet, almost like they were orbiting it, almost as if they were moons. The man found 4 bodies that shared a different center for the first time in human history. But that which will excite the greatest astonishment by far, and which indeed moved me to call the attention of all astronomers and philosophers, is this. Namely, that I have discovered 4 planets, neither known nor observed by any one of the astronomers before. These 4 planets would be called Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, the Galilean moons. This is the story of how humanity explored the Jovian system, and how it all led to what some believe is one of the most difficult NASA missions of all time.
The mission is called Galileo, a return to Jupiter.
In the 1960s, it was NASA's golden age. The Apollo and Mariner missions led to leaps in space exploration. America sent probes throughout the solar system, but its golden age was ending. NASA's budget was propped up by the Cold War. Vietnam and social reform programs from President Johnson cost money. NASA's budget was targeted when cuts were debated. It was bad news for NASA on Earth, but luckily, they got good news hundreds of thousands of miles away. A Pioneer spacecraft passed Jupiter on its way out of the solar system. Little was known about the conditions past Mars. Any human spacecraft could die before intended. Maybe the asteroid belt was impossible to pass, or Jupiter's radiation was so strong that it fried any technology that came too close. But the Pioneer didn't just reach the king of planets. It reported back. Studying it up close was possible, so a plan for a thorough investigation was coming. In 1975, NASA authorizes a study for a spacecraft that can study Jupiter and its moons. Galileo.
Jupiter is the largest and closest of all the outer planets. It is also the most similar to a star out of any planet in our solar system, 1/10,000th the mass of our Sun. This makes the Jovian system special. Jupiter is a giant, gravitating central body, but it has at least 4 moons with only a few thousandths of its mass. It is a mini solar system within our solar system. Like the terrestrial planets and our Sun, Jupiter and its moons have unique features. Features they may reveal secrets about our entire solar system waiting to be discovered.
When work began on Galileo, there were 3 ways to explore the outer solar system. A deep space flyby. The spacecraft stays in interplanetary space. It flies past 1 or more planets, gathering data during a short encounter. An orbiter. It breaks into orbit around a planet or system. And a planetary entry. A probe probes a planet. Each class of mission had been launched separately before, but NASA wanted a spacecraft that could do both. An orbiter with a probe. Galileo would be launched on a direct path to Jupiter. 5 months before it reached the planet, it would release its probe on a one-way journey into Jupiter's atmosphere. The orbiter would then enter the planet's orbit and provide long-term observations. The orbiter and probe combined were already at the limits of spacecraft complexity, but NASA was going to take it a step further. By the time Galileo was attempted, there were only 2 spacecraft designs that made it to the outer planets: a Pioneer and a Voyager. Pioneer spun around its axis. This allowed sensors to sweep the sky, but it risked lower resolution images. Voyager was inertially fixed. That required more fuel and made it more difficult for certain sensors, but it did provide the camera stability for good imaging. But Galileo combined both. A slow spinning rotor for higher energy physics experiments, a D-spun section on top for cameras and spectrometers. Powering the machine were two radioisotopic thermoelectric generators, the same generator that was used for other successful NASA missions. It was an ambitious machine for an equally ambitious mission. Proposed in 1975 and launched in 1982, arrive at Jupiter in 1984. But then things started to go very wrong. In 1971, Torrance Johnson published a paper summarizing our most up-to-date knowledge surrounding the Jovian system. It showed the limits of our knowledge from Earth.
We do not know what the satellite surfaces look like. We do not understand the composition of their atmospheres. A. The Galilean satellites are profoundly different from the terrestrial planets, the Moon, Mercury, and Mars. B. The satellites differ among themselves greatly. C. Their location around a giant planet has major importance in their origin and evolution. Io is similar in size to the Moon, Europa somewhat smaller, and Ganymede and Callisto distinctly larger, similar to Mercury. Io and Europa have lunar-like densities, while the two outer, larger satellites, Ganymede and Callisto, have extraordinarily low densities for solid planetary bodies. These densities argue strongly for significant amounts of water in Ganymede and Callisto. The similarities of the satellite systems to the solar system may well go deeper. Brightness variations observed for more than a century remain virtually unchanged, strong evidence that the gravitational pull of Jupiter keeps one hemisphere of each satellite toward it. Io and Europa are 5 to 10 times brighter than the Moon, Ganymede only slightly darker, and Callisto, the darkest, still almost twice as bright. Such bright surfaces naturally suggested ice-covered surfaces. Io does not appear to have water frost. The answers to these and many other questions await detailed examination of the system by spacecraft. Hopefully, the next generation of orbiting spacecraft will allow more detailed exploration of the satellite surfaces.
Barely 4 weeks after the Galileo mission officially started, the team encountered an existential problem. The spacecraft was too heavy. They needed to lose weight, but the only thing they could sacrifice was fuel. But without fuel, a direct flight to Jupiter was impossible. Its IUS rocket wasn't strong enough, but they did have another option: a Centaur G' rocket. It used liquid hydrogen as opposed to kerosene, and packed a hell of a punch. It could theoretically lift 40% more payload per kilogram at liftoff, but there were trade-offs. Liquid hydrogen fuel is especially explosive. The fuel could leak through the smallest cracks. Its low boiling point made it difficult to work with. The rocks presented a higher risk for the shuttle and its astronauts. The work required to make the Centaur engine safe was expensive. Galileo was stuck between not enough power or danger, so the team considered a different trajectory entirely. If they had to cut fuel, maybe they could rely on a Mars gravity assist instead. But that meant the timing had to be just right: a 5-month delay to reach Jupiter and a stricter window to launch. They would still only have enough fuel for Galileo to orbit Jupiter 5 times instead of 11. This was their best chance, but they missed it. Development was delayed. They missed the Mars deadline, shattering their hopes for a 1985 launch. Galileo was stuck on the ground. Engineers debated splitting the ambitious plan into 2, a separate flight for the probe, another for the orbiter. But then the delays kept coming. The Reagan White House targeted NASA for more cuts. Galileo was put on a hit list for potential cancellations. But they still had one powerful option. Crafting the Centaur engines to be safe for launch was no longer the more expensive option. More dangerous, sure, but Galileo could make it to Jupiter with its fuel intact. So on December 23, 1985, Galileo arrived at the Kennedy Space Center. In May 1986, it would head to the Jovian system, on top of Centaur engines. It was finally ready to launch. In late January, NASA threw a party to introduce Galileo's JPL staff to the Kennedy Space Center personnel. The launch was some months away, but the Kennedy Space Center team was kept busy by the Challenger shuttle that was due to launch in 4 days. While they celebrated at Kennedy Space Center, the warm Florida weather started to cool. In 1979, the Voyager missions did 2 high-speed flybys of Jupiter. They were brief encounters, but they were vital in updating our understanding of the Jovian system. In 1971, John S. Lewis was the first to really publish the idea that there were oceans.
The Galilean satellites very likely have extensively melted interiors, an extensive mantle of ammonia-rich liquid water, and a relatively thin crust of ices.
If true, this meant massive subsurface oceans beneath Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto.
The similarities of the satellite systems to the solar system may well go deeper.
Like the hydrothermal vents that produced us, scientists saw a mini solar system with potentially the same initial preconditions for life. Active planets spewing molten rock into water. But it was purely theoretical. There wasn't enough evidence, and there were plenty of doubts. Scientists R.T. Reynolds and Casson said that if any point there was liquid water, the massive ice shells on top would freeze it.
In spite of the visible evidence of our terrestrial example, liquid water appears to be uncommon in the solar system. Although they are comparable in size to the terrestrial planets, they contain a considerably larger fraction of condensed H2O.
Reynolds and Casson criticized Lewis's models directly.
A further consequence of the Lewis models was the result that the bulk of the mantle consisted of liquid water with only a thin outer crust of solid ice. If so, the amounts of liquid water involved would dwarf that contained in the Earth's oceans. Thermal convection in this planetary ice layer is efficient and will solidify an underlying liquid shell in a time that is short compared with the age of the body.
They argued that if there was ever liquid water on the 3 outer satellites, the top layer of ice would eventually quickly freeze it. The planets simply weren't hot enough to have the massive oceans Lewis was proposing. But there was one other possibility. Days before Voyager 1 arrived, Reynolds and Casson published another paper. Theoretically, the Jovian satellites could be warmer if Jupiter's gravitational pull caused them to flex. Flex that could generate heat. Heat that could melt rock. And if it could melt rock, maybe it could melt ice. When Voyager passed Jupiter, that theory got evidence. They received visible proof of active volcanoes on Io. In 1982, David Morrison published the most comprehensive review of the Galilean satellites, building on this newfound information.
The most geologically active body known in the solar system, with a variety of ongoing volcanic eruptions, clearly placing this satellite in a class by itself. The highest measured mountains rise 9 kilometers, giving Io the greatest topographic relief of any of the Galilean satellites. Both Callisto and Ganymede have crusts consisting predominantly of water ice. Europa, the smaller sister of Io, is presumed to be of primarily rocky composition. This rocky interior, however, is totally invisible, being covered by a crust of water ice with, perhaps, a global ocean of liquid water underneath.
There wasn't enough evidence to formally conclude that there was liquid water on Jupiter's moons. But back in the early 70s, Lewis had suggested a signal.
An extensive electrically conducting mantle, forced to convect by an input of heat from below, may be conducive to the production of a measurable magnetic field.
They needed a strong magnetometer to come close enough to each of the moons. But there was only one spacecraft that could provide them with what they needed. And it was waiting for them at the Kennedy Space Center.
Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the shuttle Challenger.
Challenger had launched 24 times already. It was a reliable craft. But by the 25th time, there had never been such a cold launch. In the morning, foot-long icicles were seen hanging on structures around the craft. The lower section of Challenger's left booster was coated with sheet ice. The O-rings in the engine were stiff. On January 28, 1986, 73 seconds in, the O-rings breached. The shuttle's tanks failed. Hydrogen and oxygen mixed. Challenger was engulfed in a fireball. The worst space disaster in American history.
Engine throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%. Challenger, go with throttle up. Challenger, go with throttle up.
I've always had great faith in and respect for our space program, and what happened today does nothing to diminish it.
NASA grounds its fleet. They tell every project to provide evidence that they can't produce a crew loss hazard. But Galileo was set to go on top of a Centaur G' rocket, so the launch was scrapped. But Bob Mitchell decided to give it one more chance. With 4 of the best minds for trajectory mechanics at JPL, they looked for a different path. Most of the team had been planning for a Venus or Earth assist, or some combination of the two. But that was impossible. There was no viable trajectory that didn't fly too close to the Sun or ran out of fuel and missed Jupiter. But Roger Deal came to Mitchell with an idea. They could send Galileo to Venus, then back to Earth, then back to Earth a second time. A Venus Earth-Earth gravity assist, or VEEGA trajectory. It didn't give Galileo any more energy, but it didn't need to. It gave it something else, a bend in its trajectory that sent it right to Jupiter. Galileo was fitted with new thermal blankets and shields to protect it as it traveled closer to the Sun. On October 18, 1989, 5 years after it was supposed to launch, it was finally ready. Galileo left Earth and headed to the Jovian system. But the problems were just starting. On February 10, 1990, Galileo reached Venus. Then it headed back. In April, with the Sun behind it, its high-gain antenna could finally be opened. It had been folded in on itself to protect against intense solar radiation. After 2 years in space, it would finally be capable of sending and receiving data quickly. The flight team sent commands to open it. Its motors powered up. They turned for 3 minutes. But then 3 turned into 5, and 5 turned into 8. That wasn't right. They were using way more power than what was needed to open it. The team waited, but the signal that the antenna opened never came. In the middle of space, 3 of the 18 ribs of the antenna had become stuck. The pins were held in sockets, and the coatings had been worn down by the vibrations during its long travel back and forth on Earth, caused by repeated delays. At least 3 pins had been entirely worn away. They were stuck holding the cocoon in place. The entire mission was built around that high-gain antenna. Fully operating, it could transmit 134,000 bits per second. There were still 2 low-gain antennas, but they could only send 40 bits per second. The mission had to produce tens of thousands of images of Jupiter and its moons. Without the high-gain antenna, most of the data would just sit in the craft's tape recorder memory. But they couldn't offload that data with the high-gain antenna. They had a tiny hard drive with practically no quick way of clearing it. And they had 4 years to go before reaching Jupiter. They pulsed the motors for weeks in an effort to free the pins some 15,000 times. That didn't work. They spun it while pulsing the motors in an attempt to use the centrifugal force to push the dish open. That also failed. They left the antenna pointing away from the Sun. The team hoped that they could make use of the thermal expansion and contraction of the metal as it cooled and heated while pointed towards or away from the Sun. Nothing happened. They tried again a month later. Still nothing. But they had one last chance. On December 13th, Galileo was the furthest it would be from the Sun. The team used that chance to freeze the antenna in an effort to finally potentially free the stuck pins. The maneuver began. The team waited. But the signal that the antenna opened never came. One of its most valuable instruments was worthless. The spacecraft could take as many pictures as it wanted. Without a way to send it back to Earth, they had to remain on board the tape recorder, a tape recorder with limited space. And it was heading directly to the Jovian system, where it was supposed to take tens of thousands of images. But then things started going very wrong. They didn't have access to AnyDesk. AnyDesk is the remote desktop tool that changes the game, because it actually feels like you're sitting right in front of your screen. It uses proprietary codec technology to give you lightning-fast connection speeds. This means minimal latency and crisp visuals, even if you are on a slow internet connection. For creators, this is a lifesaver. You can access your high-performance editing rig from a cheap laptop or even a Raspberry Pi. It supports real-time audio pass-through, so you can actually scrub video timelines and edit sound remotely without that annoying lag. And if you need to move large files, AnyDesk uses secure direct file transfer. It bypasses the cloud entirely, so your data stays private and moves faster. It's incredibly flexible. It runs on every major platform Windows, macOS, Linux, Android, and even supports legacy systems like Windows XP for you retro builders. With 99.98% uptime, it is rock stable, and best of all, for personal use, it is completely free. Don't let distance stop your workflow. Go to the link and download AnyDesk today. But if they couldn't make Galileo shout any louder, maybe they could make Earth a stronger listener. They upgraded NASA's Deep Space Network to listen better to faint signals. The team sent software updates to Galileo. They modified how the craft handled data, eliminating information from an image that wasn't valuable, reducing the amount of storage that was needed. After months of surgery in the vacuum of space, the project staff announced that Galileo was capable of completing 70% of its intended scientific goals. It flew by Earth for its second and final time on December 8, 1992. Then it took its last long flight to the King of Planets. Galileo's approach was slow. In 1995, the enormous planet filled more and more of the craft's horizon. Galileo's arrival was greeted with a never-before-seen comet colliding into Jupiter. Pillars of flame shot up 3,000 kilometers, releasing more energy than a nuclear warhead. It was a welcome sign that the mission was starting after such a long, painful journey. On July 12, 1995, Galileo severed its probe. A cable cutter sliced through the cord that tied them to each other, and then it spun like a bullet towards Jupiter. It would take 5 months to reach the planet. They'd only know it was working once it started plummeting into the atmosphere. The orbiter headed to the moons. 2 weeks after releasing, Galileo fired its engine. It first headed to Io, Jupiter's small volcanic moon. From afar, Galileo captured the probe signal as it plummeted into Jupiter's thick atmosphere. With a combination of 2 low-gain antennas, an onboard tape recorder, and a lot of optimism, the team hoped they would receive all the data. That was a success. They'd hoped this luck would continue, but in August 1995, Galileo entered an interplanetary dust storm. Peeking through the curtain of dust on October 11, 1995, Galileo snapped a photo of Jupiter, still some 36 million kilometers away. It must have been a truly awe-inspiring image. Jupiter encompassing the entire sky with the Galilean moons dwarfed beneath it. But that image would never make it to Earth. The command to transmit the data back to Earth sent the reel-to-reel tape recorder into a panic. Once it began to rewind, it never stopped. For 15 hours, the recorder remained stuck, appearing to rewind endlessly. Within hours, on Earth, a duplicate of the tape recorder suffered a catastrophic malfunction. Faulty circuitry in the recorder failed to sense when the tape had reached its end, and the force tore the tape clean off. 500 million miles away, maybe Galileo suffered the same devastating consequence, with the tape loose in the middle of space. The mission over. They sent new commands to stop the recorder as the team sank into despair. They needed it to store enough images to send back. Galileo did have a small onboard computer, but it could only store a few hundred images at best. A week passed. Setback after setback had plagued the Galileo mission since its inception. The time had come for a final test. Time to see if the recorder could still send data. It took more than half an hour for a signal to reach Galileo. It took another half an hour for Galileo to send a signal back. Just a few seconds of data from the tape recorder. But it was enough. The tape recorder wasn't broken, but something had failed. Badly. Capstans, rotating shafts beneath the tape, were responsible for controlling the rewind and playback speeds of the recorder. A day before the failure, Galileo had taken 3 snapshots of Jupiter and its major moons. Each of the 3 images would be overlaid to reconstruct a single colored photograph. But with the new images, the recorder had reached the end of the tape and needed to be rewound back to the start. But sitting in disuse during the long 6-year voyage had left the grease on the recorder's bearings stiff. The reels couldn't turn easily, and the capstans had lost traction and slipped. Instead of turning the tape, they just spun in place, like the wheels of a car spinning uselessly on ice. $1 billion car. The team needed to turn the tape back and forth to redistribute the grease. But what if 15 hours of constant wear on a single spot had worn down the tape? They had no choice. The team sent Galileo commands to turn the tape. The capstans turned the mylar pull tight. The recorder pulled the tape up to 25 times, around the potentially damaged section of the tape. hopefully securing it in place. The crisis was temporarily averted, but now the rolled-up sections of the recorder were permanently off limits. Tucked away at the end of the tape were the first images of Jupiter and its moons during the December approach. This was a particularly hard blow for those studying Io. This strange little volcanic moon was not part of the primary 2-year mission. The images lost at the end of its tape might have been the only ones we had of it. Finally, after an almost 6-year odyssey, the orbiter truly reached Jupiter. On December 7, 1995, Galileo's thrusters were finally cleared to fire, and the Jupiter orbit insertion maneuver was initiated. Galileo's trajectory was adjusted to avoid a collision course with the planet. 45 minutes into a 49-minute burn, orbital insertion was achieved. The craft was captured by the planet's gravitational field. Jupiter had many, many more moons than Galileo first observed hundreds of years earlier, through a small handmade telescope. The 4 Galilean moons were just the largest of nearly 100 moons, each of widely various sizes and shapes. On December 7th, Galileo joined them. It became the solar system's first man-made moon. And on June 27th, 1996, Galileo started its first flyby. It skimmed across the equator of Ganymede. Ganymede is not only the largest of the Galilean moons, but it's the largest moon in the solar system. If it were not for Jupiter, it could have easily earned the title of a planet for itself. While less dense, it is larger than the planet Mercury. Like its sister moons, Ganymede likely formed from the leftover gas and dust which formed Jupiter at the start of the solar system, some 4.5 billion years ago. At first glance, it appears very much like Earth's own moon. It's tidally locked with a gray surface, crowded with bright craters. The moon resembles broken pavement, but made up of ice instead of rocks. It was now years after the Lewis, Reynolds, and Casson papers had been published, but finally there was a magnetometer close to one of the moons. Dr. Margaret Kyvelson and her team confirmed the detection of a large intrinsic magnetic field. Glowing ribbons of heated electrified gas circled the poles and produced rippling auroras. But watching the auroras, it seemed as though the magnetic field sways. Because Ganymede orbits close to Jupiter, its magnetic field is embedded within the larger planet's own field. When Jupiter's magnetic field changes, Hubble discovered the aurora shift, rocking back and forth. But Ganymede shifted less than expected. Fighting back against the rocking, scientists believe is an enormous ocean beneath the surface, 60 miles deep, almost 30 times the average depth of the ocean on Earth, buried under 100 miles of icy crust. The data sent back was remarkable, despite the mission nearly ending in disaster multiple times. The tape recorder could only hold so much data before it had to be transmitted or overwritten. But the mission continued. By November, Galileo arrived at Callisto, the surface a mixture of ice and metallic rock. As Callisto orbited the furthest from Jupiter, it was less exposed to the immense gravitational and tidal forces that Jupiter exerted. However, without active processes to erode and recycle the surface of the moon, Galileo found an ancient cratered surface, which must have taken billions of years to accumulate. Callisto had long been considered a dead moon, just ice and rock hanging silently in cold space. But Galileo and its magnetometer uncovered another secret, another possible salty ocean buried beneath its surface. The research from decades before was validated. But then Galileo caught a glimpse of Europa, some 21,000 miles away. A month later, it was brought into proper focus. Europa is the smallest of the Galilean moons. Its reflective, smooth, icy surface makes it blindingly bright. It observed a vast network of ridges and bands, some as large as 60 kilometers across, and extending for hundreds of kilometers. Upon closer inspection, it seemed strange. Moons are constantly under assault from space debris, but Europa was smooth. It also lacked mountains. It seemed unlikely that Europa had been spared the same punishment as its siblings. 4 billion years is a long time to be so lucky. The smooth surface suggested constant geological activity, icy flows that erase imperfections on the surface. It also had an atmosphere, albeit a thin one, containing oxygen and even water vapor. On Earth, oxygen is the result of plants and primarily phytoplankton in the ocean. However, on Europa, the origin is likely formed by charged particles from Jupiter impacting the icy surface, splitting the H2O of water into hydrogen and oxygen. But then the Galileo team made another discovery. Dr. Kivelson's magnetometer team detected measurements for an electrically conductive fluid, a global salty ocean with twice as much water as Earth. The distance from the Sun and proximity to the deadly amount of radiation from Jupiter might have ruled out Europa as a home for life. But the ice on the surface is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it acts as a protective barrier to the internal liquid ocean, preventing the intense radiation from irradiating any potential life attempting to develop. However, the surface is also where important chemical compounds are formed by interactions with high-energy particles from Jupiter that would support life, which the shell could prevent from reaching the liquid water beneath. Moons like Ganymede and Callisto might have had oceans beneath their surfaces, but those are estimated to be about 100 miles down, each hidden beneath a thick crust with minimal geological activity to transport the vital ingredients for life down to the oceans beneath. But Europa is different. Its ocean sits closer to the surface, under an icy crust only 10 or 15 miles thick. Even without the sun to provide energy to the depths of Europa's oceans, it is possible that beneath the waves, Europa has a different source of energy. Hydrothermal vents that spew chemical energy. They had saved Io for last, out of fear. It's the closest moon to Jupiter. It is also the most hazardous. High-energy electrons pelted Galileo, piercing into the delicate electronics and requiring constant staff maintenance. When the first images of Io were relayed back, it revealed a world on fire. The moon is under immense gravitational stress from Jupiter and nearby moons. The tremendous strain generates the explosive volcanic activity that riddles the surface. The grinding of rocks melts the moon's interior, where eventually the molten rocks are forced to the surface, explosively. The camera onboard Galileo captured an active volcano on the surface of the moon. It erupted more than a mile off the surface. It is the youngest and most volcanically active surface observed in the solar system. Every second, Jupiter's magnetic field rips 1,000 kilograms, a literal ton of its mass away. The debris is left to float in orbit. Eventually, the charged ions enter Jupiter's upper atmosphere, where they produce auroras. As Galileo's end drew closer and closer, it zipped only 63 miles above Io's volcanic surface. The final flyby snapped new pictures, but the primary purpose was to put it on a final path. Fuel was running low. The decision was made to launch the craft into the planet, following its own probe. It flew forward on a one-way trip that would guide Galileo toward its last destination. At 11:57 a.m. PST, September 21st, 2003, decades after it had begun, and 500 million miles from its start, Galileo disappeared into Jupiter. The Galileo project was led by multiple generations of scientists and 8 different project managers. By its conclusion, it had passed through the hands of thousands of different people. Jupiter is an inhospitable host at the center of its own solar system that we have only begun to understand. More than 20 years after Galileo's death, a new craft launched. On October 14, 2024, Europa Clipper left Earth as a spiritual grandchild of Galileo. It is the first mission designed to study Europa specifically. In the wake of the tantalizing suggestions of subsurface oceans, potentially teeming with alien life, Europa Clipper will orbit Jupiter and eventually conduct dozens of flybys of Europa, scrutinizing its surface and investigating its internal workings with a vast array of state-of-the-art instrumentation. Dr. Margaret Kivelson, now in her 90s, leads the magnetometer team to find answers to the mysteries she and her team had originally discovered decades earlier with Galileo. Each instrument, orbiter, or probe is a step which continues the long journey to better understand our galactic neighbors and our own place in the solar system. A long way from where it began when an Italian astronomer saw something he thought were stars through the most advanced instrument the world had at the time.
Yo, this is Alex. I did most of the 3D in this video, and this project would not have been possible without Superluminal. Superluminal is the render farm that our team builds and works with, and I've never seen any system more optimized for Blender. I had over 100 4K space shots plus compositing waiting to render, and while that would have taken weeks on my local PC, Superluminal took care of all that in hours, which obviously superpowered our production, and it gave me a lot of freedom to make some sweet cinematics. To render, you just click one button on their add-on to upload your project file. It grabs all your assets, add-ons, dependencies. You can then head to their website interface where you can monitor real-time previews and progress, all while keeping track of the performance, speed, and minimal cost. And after a few minutes, you can instantly fetch project jobs in the add-on to download your renders to a file path, just like that. If you work on 3D productions and want the easiest renders, this is it. Check the link in the description to learn more.